great to also be in this space where we're thinking about the plurality of citizen sciences. Since in many of our preliminary conversations, we've really had to wrestle with this question of whether we needed a definition or not in order to engage with this topic, particularly when speaking to policymakers. So let's just see. So one of the ways in which I thought it would be interesting to approach this topic would be to actually use one of the essay questions I've set for my undergraduate students at Cambridge, which I think very much applies to this problem of how to engage with citizen sciences. And that's namely, how is theory as it applied to practice different than practice-based theorizations? And this is something I've had quite a lot of interesting conversations with my students about. What does it mean to begin from the perspective of a theory or a definition about what a citizen is, what citizen science might consist of, in comparison to working through and or studying practices as a way to think about how to theorize about those practices. So I'll just go through what I mean by this by looking specifically at a project I've been running since around 2013 with ERC funding on citizen sensing. So it would be easy enough to look at this project in terms of asking questions of what is a citizen, who is a citizen when we're talking about citizen science. And this is something that people frequently ask me. So who is a citizen? What is a citizen? We're specifically looking at monitoring technologies and how these are used to document environmental problems and to see what forms of political agency are activated. So in this respect, I would say there isn't a kind of pre-existing category of what the citizen and citizen science is. It's not someone carrying a passport that says I am a citizen scientist, but instead it's someone who is expressing political agency in different ways. Here in this case by undertaking environmental observations, and is that way becoming a kind of performative citizen. Through different practices, they're becoming citizens by articulating rights to the city, rights to clean air. In our case, they're monitoring air pollution, rights to participate, even the right to breathe, one could say. So this is a very sort of performative and practice-based way of understanding how a citizen and citizen science starts to assemble, not as a pre-existing category as such, but instead through the different kinds of inquiry and political claims that people make. So I think here's also where, when we think about the sensing component of this, again, this is a point from which I have done quite a lot of theorizing about what it means for people to observe environments, collect data, and so on. But also by working through the actual practices of data collection, it's possible to think about how these might be different forms of observation and inquiry than a scientist might conduct in a lab, for instance, or even in the field. So these are different ways of thinking about evidence and how evidence assembles, how data could have much different characteristics if citizens are gathering observations of their everyday environments, making note of pollution that they can smell or see, and then collating that material along with numerical observations that they might record with a sensing device. So these are forms of citizen science that are in the making. They're not predetermined necessarily, which is not to say that they don't have a kind of agenda or intention, as we've heard from Mookie. But certainly they are dynamic and something that people are very much sort of experimenting with as they go along. So this experimental quality to citizen sciences, I think, is really key, since that's the way in which people come to know themselves not only as political subjects, but also as inquiring subjects, as it were, and able to form different types of evidence that might, as we've heard from Alan, provoke or challenge science as it's usually conducted. And I think this is an important point, since often citizen science is also filling gaps within science as usual. So in the case of people monitoring their environments, they feel that not enough monitoring is being done. It's not being done in the locations that it needs to be. So this is where I think citizen sensing is one of many types of citizen science, and it alone is also not a kind of singular category. And within this plurality, it's not simply also a multiplication of types of science, but it's a way of multiplying the political subjects and modes of inquiry that might be undertaken. So this is not a kind of binary or hierarchy to ask this question about theory as it's applied to practice or practice as it's generating theory. But I think one of the kind of key points here is by working through practice-based theorizations, it's possible to identify sites for intervention. And this is one of the key sort of points that we've really discussed at length also with my students, which we find quite interesting. It's quite easy to have a model or a definition of how a particular practice is seen to unfold. But in fact, when working through practice, these frameworks often rupture and unfold into all kinds of other possibilities, which can also become sites for intervention. So these are ways of thinking about science differently, not simply for the sake of it, but also to identify opportunities to do science differently, to engage different actors, to tackle problems in ways that might allow for more interesting and even democratic solutions, potentially, to problems like air pollution or many other factors that people are studying in relation to environmental health and many other citizen science projects. So if I return to this question then of how to bring together practice and theory, it would be to say that this potentially, this proliferation of citizen sciences working both from theory and practice is a way to expand possibilities for collective inquiry and action. And so that's what I find particularly exciting about this conversation and this panel that we're having, since I think it opens up this question of how we potentially think through the definitional practice, but also allow it to open up by being challenged by the very dynamic practices that are constantly remaking what citizen science is and what it might be. So that's also just to recognize the funders who have aided this work. And if you're interested in the Citizen Sense project, we have more material there online.